considered that book 6 would be his answer to the problems of book 5. For those who only read book 5 by itself as the Grand Inquisitor, we get a false portrait of Dostoevsky. It's kind of like the people who only read Inferno and think that that's what Dante wrote. We have to read book 6 because it's the counter-argument. But what happens in book 6 is that the counter-argument is actually a portrait of a life. This gives me goosebumps. We have the protest by Ivan, all the arguments against God that are given, even the writing of a story against God. And the story is the Grand Inquisitor. And the Grand Inquisitor is this didactic sermon, in a sense. It's supposed to be a poem in which the Inquisitor is laying it out before Christ and saying the reason that Christ deserves judgment. Instead of coming back and countering these arguments, which are really good arguments against the goodness of God or against his sovereignty, Dostoevsky does something profound. He shows the life of Zosima, the life of someone who, in the opening of this, faces the death of a child. His brother Markel dies when he is young, and rather than take the death of a child as a way of protesting God, Zosima turns to loving the Lord. He's quite young when his brother dies, but later in life this comes back to him, and he begins to realize that he is guilty for everyone's sin in the same way that his brother had said earlier. So his brother said, I'm guilty for all, I'm responsible for all, and Zosima takes this as his life call. So that'll be a question that we want to get into more. How can you possibly be responsible for all? How can you be guilty for all? And what you see here is a reaction between lots of different characters in Zosima as he preaches this and as he says this. But he doesn't just say it in words. He actually lives it out. We saw the first time that he said something along these lines is when he laid before Dmitri, who is potentially going to be a murderer, and he said, forgive me, right? He doesn't pour forgiveness out over Dmitri. He asks forgiveness as though he is responsible for Dmitri's sins. So this complicity of all people. Well, what we see in Dostoevsky is that we see a different understanding of sin maybe than what Protestants are used to. Protestants in a lot of churches are used to an idea of sin that's more like a tally chart or a debt, and then it gets heavier and heavier or weightier and weightier, and then it's removed, like a content, like a bag just pulled up. The way that the Orthodox would be thinking about sin, the way Dostoevsky would think about it, is more like a contagiousness or a sickness. So Notes from Underground begins with, I am a sick man, I'm a wicked man. Sickness and wickedness are equated there. So the contagiousness of sin. So by lying, I help sin grow and increase its hold in people's lives. I've contributed to helping the darkness thrive when I have been violent or mean or done things that I shouldn't have done or did not do the good that I ought to have done, that all the ways that I've sinned has helped the darkness grow, and thus I'm guilty for other people's sins. I'm complicit in this. I am taking their sins in some ways on myself because I've contributed to it. And that's how Dostoevsky shows sin to be in these characters. And so we have a murderer that's confessing to Zosima, and Zosima lays himself before the murderer, and this, of course, saves the man. And so we have all these instances of murder and guilt and Zosima saving people by being willing to take their sins on himself. And that's going to be important later in the text. He also gives a sermon of sorts. He explains different passages of scriptures. He talks about loving everything, about charity, the importance of loving every leaf, every ray of God's light, loving all things. This is similar to what his brother had said, that we need to love with suffering. We need to love to the point that it hurts us and that we see our responsibility for other people, like this kind of love. And these are the same words that he had given earlier to the Lady of Little Faith. We need to love in action and perseverance and courage and make it a whole knowledge, and not just love for immediate results and to make headlines, and to love humanity as a whole. And this is the difference between Ivan, Fyodor, the Grand Inquisitor, the Lady of Little Faith, and those like Zosima. Zosima shows us a counter picture, a different way of living. And then, of course, Zosima dies at the end.